And today's special guest is no exception to that. I'd like to hand it to Dave now, who will lead us in conversation with Ron Williams, Sloan Fellows Class of 1984, Chairman and CEO of RW2 Enterprises, and former Chairman and CEO of Aetna. Dave.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you all for joining in person and online. Ron, welcome back. Thank you so much for being willing to do this fireside chat on what's turned out to be a nice spring day, but you never know. I won't do the long bio of Ron, but I would like to say a few things about him, and then we'll start with some questions for Ron from me. Ron, we've never met, so we haven't scoped out any of these questions or anything. But then we will open it up and you all will have a chance to ask your questions and some online as well. So as Lauren indicated, and I think it was a reminder for you, that Ron is currently the Chairman and CEO of RW2 Enterprises. And certainly you know Ron, and he's famous for his role as Chairman and CEO of the insurance giant Aetna. He's also the best-selling author of Learning to Lead, The Journey to Leading Yourself, Leading Others, and Leading Organizations. If you haven't seen it, there's a copy right here. I had Ron autograph it, so I can't lend it to you. Nonetheless, it is a best-selling book, and I strongly encourage it to you. It is great, and we'll only scratch the surface of it when we're in here together this afternoon. Ron has been very interested in creating effective health systems for a very long time now. He's also a leader with respect to the challenges of leadership itself, especially leadership at the top of large organizations. And with RW2 Enterprises, he serves as a mentor for a number of leading CEOs and other organizational leaders around the country and around the world. He serves in a variety of governance roles as well. He's a director of the Boeing company of Warby Parker, former lead director of American Express, has served on the board of Johnson & Johnson. He also has a number of nonprofit leadership and public service leadership responsibilities and has had them, including currently serving as chairman of the conference board, a member of the President's Circle on the National Academies. He serves on the Cleveland Clinic's Board of Trustees. He was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and among other things, served on President Obama's President's Management Advisory Board from 2011 to 2017. Ron holds he's a graduate of Roosevelt University, and we're very proud to claim Ron as the holder of a Master of Science from the MIT Sloan School of Management. I think we still have a few minutes left, but I wanted to...
I was going to say, I think you got the bio that my father sent over.
Very good. So Ron, I want to pick up on some of the themes from the book. And one of those starts with self-leadership, actually. And before we get fully into that as an organizational leader, can you talk a little bit about your background and what the foundation of that is?
Well, look, I would say I would have been the least likely person to ever become the CEO of a Fortune 77 company in America for a wide variety of reasons. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. My father was a bus driver. My mother was a manicurist. We lived in a community that was virtually all black. I was fortunate that the Chicago school system was integrated, and I went to a school that was majority white. And when I graduated, not one counselor talked to me about going to college, not one. And this is where this whole notion of not letting other people define who you are, what you can do, and what you can become is so fundamentally important. And the title of the book is talking about leading yourself because that's phase one for many people. Now, the people in this room have led themselves so far to this point. The challenge for this group are the next two. it's leading others and learning to lead organizations. But for me, one of the things I talk about is taking risk is fundamentally important. Because when you have nothing and know nothing and you enter new environments, it seems extraordinarily risky. Whether it is taking a new job, whether it's relocating to a different city, joining a different company. And so risk-taking is really, really important in my background. Now, I mentioned, I was the least likely. I stuttered, I couldn't speak, I couldn't talk. I didn't have a large vocabulary, but what I had was a couple of winters of working in a car wash in Chicago. And that defined for me what I did not want to do for the rest of my life. And so what I learned was triangulation is fundamentally important. And by triangulation, I mean setting a goal, getting to that goal, and most importantly, not resting, setting a new goal, and recognizing that a lot like sailing, you don't get from point A to point B in a straight line. You get there by going in different directions depending upon the wind.
Wow. Did you feel yourself as a risk taker then, as a young person, or did you feel that somehow the risks were less than others might imagine?
I think of it as kind of a calibration. I would look at a situation and always ask myself, what's the worst thing that happens?
Yeah.
And often when you thought about it, the worst thing that happened was I wasn't going to be washing cars. It wasn't going to be 10 degrees outside. I wasn't going to be wet. So what is there to complain about?
Yes.
And so it's all about calibration.
Yes.
And so for me, I didn't think about it as risk. I thought about it as the worst thing that happens is not that bad. And so that redefined this notion of risk. Later, I gave it a name and figured out what it was, but that was not at the start. It was not about risk. It was really about not settling for where you are. Yeah. Later in the book, I talk about this notion of every year being 15% better. Now, if you do the math, you can't do that in infinitum, ad infinitum. But it really isn't about the number. It's about most of us can convince ourselves that we can be 2, 3, 4% better next year. But if you're going to be 15% better, you've got to really think deeply about what you need to know, what you need to learn, what skills and experiences you need to have. And so that, for me, was one of the ways that helped me think about this risk-taking, which is, worst thing that happens, not that bad. And if I set a high goal, I might get there.
So we'll move on in a minute, but can I ask you just one more question about this part, and that is, I just don't know the answer. You went to Roosevelt University. From the car wash to Roosevelt University, is there a step in between that, or does that just, how does that
what happened was, I worked in the car wash, and when I graduated from high school, I did this while I was in high school, graduated from high school, I went to a community college, and I worked full-time, went to school full-time. I went to community college for 2 years, and then I went to Roosevelt. And Roosevelt was a school for kind of urban learners. A lot of schools in those days, if you needed English 201 and 301, they didn't offer them in the evening to students who were working. Roosevelt did. So 48 months from the day I graduated from high school, I got my BA degree, working full-time. Yes. And so again, it's a calibration question. What's hard work? To me, that was just what I did in order to get out the other end of the pipeline and get what I thought was my union work permit. I couldn't get a good job without a college degree. I needed a college degree. I was going to get a college degree.
Yes. Thank you. That's a lot. The book talks about reframing a bit also. Can you talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, reframing is really this notion of not accepting others' definitions of who you are. You're a woman, you're not going to be good in math. You can't get into tech. You're an African American, you can never run a business. You're Asian, you're not going to lead a group of people. Whatever it is, stereotypes people have about who you and what you are. And whether we know it or not, they really do penetrate. And you really have to consciously work to reframe your sense of both who you are and what is possible? And what have you ruled out as a possibility because other people have framed you in a different box? And later, maybe we'll get a chance to talk about how I decided to go to Aetna, because that was a classic reframing experience for me. But throughout your career, people will say, you'll never be a leader. You don't know how to manage people. You're not a born leader. Leaders aren't born, leaders are made. Very few people are born leaders. So this reframing is really simply taking it upon yourself to transform yourself into what you want to be. And that means that you try to understand people who are where you are going or want to go, and that you really tap into them, get to know them, build relationships with them, because they can help you open your eyes to figure out how to reframe who you are and what you want to become.
So we will talk in a couple of minutes about the taking the leadership role at Aetna. Before that, do you feel that you had had those experiences of others seeing you in a more limited way, and your decision to define yourself to a significant degree?
I mean, the answer is yes. I had many situations where, like most people, I say you fail your way to success. Mm-hmm. And I always tell people, the number of failures I've had would fill this room in really tiny type. So this is not about a story of endless successes. This is about a story of not letting your failures stop you and of persevering through your failures. And yes, lots of people told me, you're never going to be good in sales because you stuttered and you couldn't speak. I became great at sales. Yes. I did not accept what was a limitation that others defined for me, and I worked it through. That you can't lead a group of people because you're too young and they're older than you, or they're this, or they're that. Yes. And really, this whole question of not accepting the limitations and proving people wrong through results. Yes. And I think one of the things that I gravitated toward were a focus on activities that had quantifiable results. Yes. When I started my career, there were no African-American executives in line positions in corporate America. If you were lucky, you were in sales and you were in what they called special markets, which meant if you were Hispanic, you sold beer to the Hispanic community, and if you were black, you sold Coke to that community. No one ran a business. No one was a general manager. And so I wanted to focus on those things where quantifiable results would give me the opportunity to demonstrate that people were wrong.
If this is too personal, we don't have to spend time on it, but you are one of the, you speak as smoothly as anyone I know. Can you talk about stuttering and then not stuttering a bit?
Sure. You know, basically, like everything else I've done, I cured myself. Uh-huh. I basically figured out that the stutter was up here, and that I placed too much emphasis on the flawless delivery of the word. And when you pause for a second, most people didn't even notice it. And once that pressure was gone, it just kind of disappeared. Yeah. And so, you know, that's worked for me. Other people may have different approaches that work for them. But that's what I did. I didn't let it stop me. Yeah. And in instances, if I did stutter for a reason, I just kept going. Like I said, don't let your failures define you.
Yes. Yes. So let me save myself by moving to the thoughts about leading Aetna. So that many people aspire to being a CEO, and Aetna is an amazing, huge, important firm. You had, by many measures, had an extraordinarily successful career before taking that leadership role. But it wasn't exactly an easy, like icing on a cake with a cherry on top at day one, right? I mean, there were some significant challenges here. And so I'd like to know how you thought about that leadership role.
Well, I'd give you just a little backstory, which is, one, it all really started here at Sloan. Because it was in a session like this, we had these dinners, and we met with CEOs, and one day, one of the CEOs was talking, and I said to myself, I could learn to do that. Can't do it today, but I could learn to do it.
Yeah.
And so it was that exposure and the opportunity to, again, see and meet people who were where you possibly could go. So I left Sloan. I went back to Control Data, which was a pretty big company in those days. It had missed a technology turn, started a business in California, very successful business. We sold it, and then I went into healthcare with a company which was Blue Cross, which became WellPoint. And I was there for 14 years, and my vision was to one day be the CEO of that company. The step would have been to be president. And I had conversations with the CEO, and it was not taken seriously. There was no plan, there was no communication, and I said, okay, next. And I left, and I ended up being recruited to Aetna. Now, when I went to Aetna, I want you all to visualize every day you go out and you round up $1 million in cash. You put it in the middle of a bonfire pit and you set it on fire. And you do that every day for a year. And that's how much money Aetna lost the first year that I was there. Now, I joined, I became president, and then a few years later I became the CEO. And it was really a fabulous experience. But it's back to this question of, I could have stayed where I was. I was an executive vice president. I was extremely well paid. But the person I worked for, very nice gentleman, learned a lot from him, but we were close in age. I was never going to be CEO of that company, and I wanted to be a CEO. And so I was willing to do the things. Now, I'd have to say, I came home one day and told my wife, we're moving from Southern California, Los Angeles, to Hartford, Connecticut. And let me say, I made many a sale, and that was probably the hardest I've ever made. So it's back to not accepting what other people define for you. Yeah. And it was hard work. We created an enormous culture. You know, I had a great team. My chief human resource officer, Elise Wright, was a valued partner and colleague. We built a great culture. When I left 3 years running, we were the most admired company in our sector. And I can tell you, when I started, people were embarrassed to say they worked at Aetna. The CEO that was there before the team I was with joined was fired for having lost a suit and being quoted in the newspaper of saying the only reason that he lost the suit was because this woman's husband had died. She was a weeping widow. The judge was a politically motivated, and the attorney was an ambulance-chasing attorney. Now, this poor woman had lost, so his tenure ended rather quickly.
You can see that.
But that was reflective of the tone and tenure and lack of leadership of the company. And I joked that having been there, it made me a believer in management firing squads. So, but that's only humorous, I would add.
But those headlines were real, and there were more, and they were
real.
brutal.
We were being sued by virtually every medical association in the country, every health system. And the CEO who hired me initially was a physician who really understood how to build those relationships, settle the suits, bend the fences. He cared a lot about culture, a lot about strategy. He didn't know how to run the business, and we made a great team.
Yeah. But can I ask it then about, I mean, you wanted to be CEO. You joined, there was the president's step kind of initially, and so that search process maybe didn't come with a guarantee about the next step, or can you think, I just want to understand how you thought about that.
What happened was, because I joined the company, I had a very unusual clause in my agreement where I would be appointed to the board. Mm-hmm. And so being a president and appointed to the board is about as strong a signal as you can get. No board can guarantee that you're going to be CEO, mm-hmm. but it's yours to lose if you don't perform. And as usual, I performed, and it worked out well for the company, it worked out well for me, it worked out well for our shareholders. Yeah. But no, there clearly was risk, but again, what's the worst thing that happens? I'm president of Aetna, I transform the company. I don't think I'll have too many troubles if it doesn't come to play out here.
Yes. So let's talk about the transformation a bit, because the second part of the book is about leading others, and then there's leading organizations. And so we're kind of straddling those two pieces here. It involves teams. It involves setting priorities. We'll talk about culture in just a minute. But before that, there's what is the strategy? Who are the teams that matter, and how they span the organization to take it where you want to go? I don't know, maybe all that's pretty simple.
Well, yeah. What happens is it really is intricately involved in culture and talent. That in order, the CEO gets both too much credit and deserves the blame, but the reality is all companies are collaborative organisms. You can't get anything done in a company in one function or one silo because it's interrelated. And what we did was we built a team over time that was disciplined, that was a high-performance team, that was based in good values, I believe, and a team that was centered around respect, but discipline. You know, I would explain to people, our goal's 100, you show up, your result is 99. Let's be clear, 99 is not 100. You missed your goal. Doesn't make you a bad person. But it does mean that we have to figure out what we can do to help you get to 100. Yeah. It has to be, because you miss that, not alone, but as an organization. And so the big part was really getting the right technology. We had the right human resources, structuring the company and creating alignment of responsibilities. How the incentives were structured in the company didn't work. The company had a one-size-fits-all to decision-making. All the decisions were centralized. They had to be decentralized. So it brought into play, quite honestly, all the things that I learned at Sloan in terms of being a general manager and being an executive, that it takes a variety of decisions and activity. The most important thing we did was start with the customers and develop a point of view and a strategy about where the company wants to go. Customers don't want to be with a company whose sole mission is surviving. They want to be with a company that has a strategic vision about the evolution of the industry, and we created that. Yeah. So those were just a few of the things I would talk about.
And did that team come as a mix of people brought in from the outside, like some time earlier you had been, or mostly kind of raising people from within, or how do you think about that?
It actually was about half and half. There were a lot of very good people who actually were a level or two down in the company. Yeah. And so we gave them the significant opportunity to step up, to run our national account business, to run our middle market business. We brought in new talent to run the networks, to run individual businesses. So we had a combination of what I'd say legacy, people who really have been kind of keeping their head down and doing their best to keep the lights on in the place and keep the organization sane, and new people who brought a new perspective. And the culture that we created was really a combination of the legacy culture of Aetna. It was a review to look at all the things Aetna had been and had lost its way in becoming. And a big part of that became what we call the Aetna way and the behaviors of the company.
But that is such an important part of that leadership and culture is what do we keep, and what needs not to change, and what needs to change, and how to make those tangible, make those real for people, and your role as a leader in doing that.
Yeah, I think one of the things we tried to do was to create what I call a very clear set of expectations of leaders. You know, when people get promoted and they get a job, they think about more money in those days, a parking space, because people drove to work, an office, and things, all the perks. We don't really always pause and think about the obligations we take on. You assume responsibility for 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people who don't go to fancy meetings, they don't fly around the country. They're counting on you to make the right decisions to give them a place to work. So the expectations of leaders was really all about how we synchronize what we expected of you when you became a leader with the values of the company and ultimately the outcomes that we wanted in terms of customers as well as financial results. And that was very, very important to me as a leader, was to be clear and highly consistent in that regard.
So I want to turn to one other aspect of you as a leader. No one likes to be defined by one single dimension, but if I don't ask you about being a Black CEO of a large organization in America, then maybe I'm not doing either of us a service or these folks a service. Ken Chanel, Ken Frazier, Roger Ferguson, there haven't been that many. And so can you talk about that experience from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it is, first I would say, the lack of Black CEOs in America is an enormous waste of talent. I meet executives every day in the C-suite all over America who could run companies better than many of the CEOs I've seen and met in my career.
Yeah.
One of the things I comment on, and then I'll come back and answer your question, is that in your career, when you are an outsider of any type, you spend a big time of your career in rooms with people who I say are always certain and occasionally correct. And as an outsider, you feel like you have to be always certain and always correct. And let me tell you, you're the only one playing by those rules. And so that's really, really important to understand. Now, the reality is, it's great and fabulous to be a Black CEO, but you damn well better be a great CEO. And the people you named were absolutely outstanding CEOs. And if you're not a great CEO, you don't last, no matter who you are. Your job, it is an incredibly difficult, incredibly challenging job. And no one wants to be defined by their gender or their race or their ethnicity, but the reality is you are. People bring those stereotypes with them. And I'll tell one story, which is one that I think drives it home better than anything. I had just been promoted to CEO. I was going to Washington to meet the president, and I was at the FBO, which is like the place you get the plane. It's a little mini airport for private planes. And I was dressed, had on my suit, tie, all set to go see the president. I'm walking into the building. A guy next to me is walking in, happened to be a white gentleman, had on a backpack, hat on backwards, going in. The guy at the entry to the door asked me, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Inside." And he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Inside." And he said, "Well, the driver's restroom is around the other side of the building." And I said, "What makes you think my plane is not in there?" And before he could answer, the person from NetJets, who's like the concierge, rushed over, greeted me, and cleaned up as best she could. And so the message is, doesn't matter if you're the CEO, doesn't matter if you're going to see the president, the first thing people see is the color of your skin. And the answer is, you just got to get over it, because just go do what you're going to do. And so the focus on results, culture, talent, creating an organization where people are treated the right way, those are all the things that really matter.
So listening to you say that, though, you never know what day that experience is going to happen, do you?
That's correct.
I mean, you wake up in the morning, and is this one of those days or is it not?
That's why all the Black men in this room have had to talk with their kids. If they haven't, they will. If you don't know what that is, ask somebody. They'll tell you what that talk is.
Yes. If we had another hour, I suspect there would be more. Let me, before we turn it and open it up to questions, you spend a lot of time now mentoring other people who lead organizations, CEOs and board members and so on. Among the things that you do is share some of the experiences like you've done here today, and also hear what it is that they're struggling with or that they're concerned about, maybe in their business, but also in society. And if you'd like to say anything about that mentorship,
Sure.
Maybe on both, in both directions.
Well, look, I would say one of the things I'm proudest of is that of all the people I work with at Aetna, we have more people who've become CEOs. I mean, I think we've been a source of talent and a talent academy for the industry. And that's just not reflective of me, it's reflective of the team that we built. And so the thing that people talk about most really is talent. it really is about their teams. And when you're sitting in the seat you're sitting in, you're wondering, gee, where am I going to get the opportunity? You know, is there a path for me? When you're running a company, you're saying, where am I going to get the people? Where am I going to get the high performers, the people who are really going to have an enormous impact on the business? And so talent really turns out to be one of the critical things. Transformational change is probably right up there. And transformational change is constant, whether it is the pandemic and transforming the business to accommodate through that, whether it's how do you make a business truly digital as opposed to creating a digital department which doesn't digitize the business. It is how do you, for CEOs, how do you work with your board? How do you present, how do you work with your board? You know, I work with people in all categories of industries, and I always tell them, the one thing I can't help you with is your business. You know your business. But what I can help you with is I know how to run large-scale, sophisticated, complex organizations and how to create cultures and an environment that produces talent and high performance. And so those are the things that most of the coaching is really about, is really their team, and how to think about sometimes outside constituencies and stakeholders and think about how they balance those issues.
Does governance, contrasted with management, come up in those settings also? And I wonder if that's...
Very much so. When you become CEO, and that was the one thing I didn't know. By being on the board, I knew the board, I knew our shareholders, I knew everything. What I didn't know how to do was run the board. And being chairman and running a board, boards have a personality as a group, they have a personality as committees, and they have sub-personalities of combinations of individuals. And so figuring out how you understand those groups, but most importantly, get the most value out of each of those components to help you do a better job for the company is really, really important. So governance does come up quite a bit in terms of thinking about their board and problem board members, challenging board members, things like that.
Yes, and often something, as you suggest, that until you get into that C-suite, you haven't really dealt with those kinds of issues before.
That's correct.
Yeah. Maybe one real quick final point. You engage with MIT, and thank you for it in so many ways. You've been one of MIT's trustees, a member of the corporation. You come and do stuff like this today. Why?
Well, I'm working off my debt to the institution. Look, it was transformative for me in so many ways, and the least I can do is come back and share my perspective and, you know, give some friendly criticisms of things that the institution might be able to do better, and help the institution continue the kind of historic role that it has. But talent development is just so important that for me it's an opportunity to do that. The creation of the Health Systems Initiative, which Professor Doyle is now leading, has been one of the things I've been involved in. Really highly successful, and he's the right man in the right spot for that role. He's done a fabulous job. And so for me, it's really just a way to kind of give something back.
A lot, thank you,
Yeah.
yes. So does anyone have a question or a comment or a personal anecdote, but especially questions? There's one up here in the back.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for making time to speak with us. This was a really illuminating talk. I'm curious, so I really resonated with the only you are playing, by those rules. I'm just curious though, in terms of looking at the paradox as well, that also you have to work twice as hard, kind of to get to where you are. And then also there's little latitude that's given to you, or little grace that's given to you when you make the mistakes. So I'm just curious how you've navigated that space.
Well, look, I think this is a place where quantifiable results are extremely helpful. That, if there's a goal and you're demonstratively hitting that goal consistently, whether it's 100% or 105% or whatever, that those results speak for themselves in that regard. And then there are two dimensions that people get judged on. One dimension is, did you get the goal? The second dimension is, how did you get the goal? And by that I mean, yes, you got 105%, but there's a trail of broken bodies along the way. And there is where the leadership of people comes in. And the way I talk about it is that when you have a very high motivation to achieve a goal, you always want to hit 105 or 100, whatever the numerical goal is. Your consideration for the team and the people has to be even higher. You have to have a higher level of consideration for the team members, for the colleagues. It's not, a lot of people get confused. They think that you lower your goal achievement to be more considerate of the team. No, you raise your consideration for the team. And I'm always reminded of one thing that was important in where we had a project we were working on. It was a deal we were trying to get done. It was, I don't know, 5:30 or something. We had at least another 2.5 hours. And there was a point at which I just would have said, okay, everybody, we're going to stay till 8 and we're going to get this done. And what I learned was it was so much better to pause and say, okay, we got 2 hours of work to do. How do we get this done? And somebody said, well, look, I got to go see my kid. I got to do this. I got to do that. Can we convene at 8? And can everybody make that work? Everybody said yes. So we were able to hit our goal, but we showed consideration for the team members instead of just making them plow through. Yeah. And so I think that's an example how I would think about your question.
That's really great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing today. My name is Eric. I'm Sloan Fellow 23. Nice to meet you. I have a question regarding to your choice between corporate and startup. So, today a lot of people sitting here are facing the choices, should we go to big corporate or should we try something more risky in startup? So I want to understand your view and in your past experience, how you think about it. And if you were one of our graduates today, where you go to more startup route or you're going to the corporate route? Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I started out with my corporate career in a company which in the late 70s had 70,000 employees. I spent about 6 years there. It's what I call kind of the apprenticeship up through internship. I then, when I came to Sloan, got interested in the venture club. When I left here, I started a business. And was quite successful. We sold it. It was in healthcare. And then I went back into the large companies. Each choice is a very personal choice. They are two different paths. Now I do private equity, where we buy companies. Companies would say 50 million in EBITDA and grow them over a 5 or 6 year period. And so that's a different path, where you're going into companies that are privately owned. They don't deal with the public market issues, and it's all about really the growth of the company and the creation of value for its customers. So I think the best thing I could tell you is understand the differences in the environment and understand what you want to do, and also understand that it's not an immutable choice. You can move back and forth. So it's a question of what do you think is right for you today?
I love that point. Is that actually a lot of people think that this is a life choice that's permanent, that yes, maybe not so much. Yes.
Hi, Ronald. Thank you for being here today. I'm Manu, second year MBA, so graduating now. You mentioned early on in the talk that one part of your book talked about how to lead yourself. And I think I speak for a lot of people here when I say, I think I've improvised my way all the way to Sloan. So I was wondering, if you could dig a little deeper into that and describe a little whether you actually felt like you were leading yourself throughout your entire journey, or whether there was a point where it had kind of all clicked, and yeah, just tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, what I would say is that leading yourself turns out to be, of the three things I talk about, the single most important, because when you lead an organization, the single most important thing comes back to leading yourself. If you don't lead yourself well, you're on page 1 of the Wall Street Journal for some inappropriate act or behavior. that results in chaos to you or the enterprise. And so this issue of leading yourself is fundamentally core to what you need to do. And that comes down to values-based, who you are, and the higher you go in the organization, the narrower your behavioral zone can be. When I walk into a room, as a CEO, if there are 4 people there and I speak to 3 and forget to speak to the fourth wants to know what did they do that I didn't speak to them. And so you have to be much more mindful of how you lead yourself in those environments. You're never done with that charge, because even in leading others, you have to figure out, how do you communicate authentically to them? How do you handle tough issues? How do you do things like lay people off, and have the tough conversation and be empathetic, recognizing organizations have tough decisions to make?
Hi, thanks for talking to us today. I was thinking about when you said you looked at a CEO and said, I can learn to do that. What were some of the skills and experiences you had to cultivate to find yourself successful in that role?
One of them is really being able to, the way someone explained it to me once was the difference between hand magic and stage magic. And hand magic, people do card tricks and do things. Stage magic is making, 787 disappear off the stage. When you're the CEO, you have to be able to do stage magic. You've got to walk into a room with, thousands of people and be comfortable in who you are, what you do, and what you say. So you hear this term used about command presence, et cetera. That's an explanation of it. In terms of leadership, you have to learn to select talent, hire people who are as good as you or better. Everybody wants to hire younger versions or less experienced versions, if not younger, of themselves. If you're going to build a business, you need the best you can get. I don't care if they're, if it was legal and you could hire them at 12, I'd hire them at 12 if they're good. If there were 80 and they're good, I'd hire them. So you want talent. The thing that you have to also learn is a multi-stakeholder dimension and a collaborative dimension, because everything happens in that context. And I have another one which I talk about, which is very hard to maintain in today's world, which is assume positive intent. Because when you are different and someone says, boy, how do you get that hair that way? Or, where'd you get that tie? Where'd you get that dress? The first thing you assume is negative intent. And let me tell you, if they're a jerk, you'll know it. But if it's just somebody who doesn't know how to interact with you, you assume positive intent. That's very helpful. There's a host of skills, I obviously can't run them down. What I would say is culture and strategy are really fundamentally important things. But culture is so important. Culture are the curbs that keep companies safe. And by that, the example I use is end of the quarter, you could hit your quarter guidance if you just did this one thing. And somebody proposes that one thing, and the whole room shouts back, that's not who we are. We don't do that here. And that culture keeps the company safe. And as a CEO, your job is to help embody that and distill it throughout the company. Now I'm going to go just a little long here, which is, the question often is, what is the culture of a company? And you'll see the CEO and you'll see the plaques on the wall. The culture is not what the CEO says it is. It's what the employee on the front line who tells their new coworker the culture is. That's what the culture really is. Your job as a CEO or as a leader is to align those two in a way that it's as close as you can get. Obviously, you never get it completely right.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you for the talk. Now you are in charge of RW2, and I think that's your own company, right? And when you start your own company, although you have achieved a lot in the past, but when you start on your own, it's still a new chapter and you have to start from scratch. Did you wish that you actually started earlier on your own instead of going through the corporate life for so long?
That's a great question. I often joke that now that I'm in private equity, I always joke, if I was so smart, why wasn't I in private equity sooner? The problem is, it's the best job I've had, but I can only get it because of all the things I've done. So it's kind of, there are necessary prerequisites. I meet many, many great people in private equity who can't run anything. They're very knowledgeable, they're very sophisticated, and they make a lot of money. They're perfectly happy doing that. I like to do things. I like to actually run, I like to make great companies. And so part of it is what you want to do. For me, I thought about my next chapter for 2 years before I left Aetna. And I decided I wanted a portfolio of significant corporate companies, American Express, Johnson & Johnson, Boeing, that I wanted private equity. And I work with the company where every deal we do has an investment professional and a former CEO who work as teams to create value in the company. I wanted to do philanthropy. And so for me, I thought about that before and planned ahead for what I wanted to do. But the answer is, if I could go back in time, would I go into private equity or something uniquely? No, because I wouldn't know what I know now. I would know how to make money, and it would have made relatively easier than running companies. But for me, it was the right choice.
Hi, my name is Morgan Cray. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Williams. I'm also a Sloan Fellow, graduating this year. In terms of your transitions, I would love to know how you thought about the percentage of development required and your percent readiness, and what was your appetite, right, for reskilling, right, in that role as opposed to being ready before you entered?
Before I entered the Sloan Fellow, I'm just trying to get the right context, before and after.
Before becoming Aetna CEO, or even before, I guess, the well point, so the transition into the companies, and you thought about stepping into those roles, how much did you feel you were ready, and how much did you think this was
for each assignment?
A learning step, yes.
Yeah, okay. The answer is that the person leaving the job is a finished product of X number of years of experience in that job. Even if you understand the technical components of it, you don't always understand the exact environment and the exact expression of it. So I think I place more emphasis on a willingness to learn it than readiness at the time to do it. One of the biggest limitations on development, and this is one of the reasons that CEOs have to get involved in talent management in companies, is this fallacy that you're the district finance manager who is now ready to become the regional finance manager because you have the right readiness and you understand all the disciplines, et cetera. The reality is, from a career development point of view, the last thing you need is more finance. You need to move into product, you need to move into brand, you need to move into manufacturing. At the top of the house, understanding how it all fits together is so much better than coming up through one lane only. And so it's really what is your headroom, what's your ability, what's your appetite, and most importantly, how hungry are you for these experiences? So that's, hopefully I'm answering your question, but that's how I always think about it.
Can I steal a remark from, some of you may have seen Ginny Rometty when she was here recently as former CEO of IBM, and one of her favorite phrases is growth and comfort never happen together. Yeah. And so maybe there's a little bit of a connection.
Yeah, I think that. Very much so.
Yeah. Well, that's her trademark. You can't use that.
I can't use it. I have plenty of my own.
So maybe if there's time for one more question, I know we have people who have class at 1 o'clock, so I want to be respectful of that.
Hi, my name is Joyce. I have a question for you. I want to dig a little bit deeper about how you lead yourself. When you are other in a big corporation, you have to assimilate yourself to their cultures, and I'm sure you bring a very diverse set of thoughts when you first come in. I've just realized that I have a problem with authority. And as you gain the credibility and validation of a large organization and assimilate, I find myself losing some of my kind of own personality, my own thoughts. I'm curious how you've tussled with those two things and how your leadership style of leading yourself has evolved over time by trying to reconcile those two things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a question I want you to think about, and then I'll answer your question, which is, do you have a problem with authority if you're the authority?
Less so.
I don't want an answer. The answer is for you, not for us. But
Less so.
Let me answer your question first, which is, there's confusion. I'm not hiring you because you're going to agree with everything I do. I'm hiring you to execute the decisions that we make based on a rigorous and thoughtful process that we go through. Now, the reality is, I may make the wrong decision. You may judge it to have been the wrong decision before we made it and say, why are they doing this idiot thing? Because I know it's wrong. If it's wrong, we'll stop doing it and we'll be doing what you would have had us do because it's not working. And so don't confuse your alignment and complete agreement with every decision made with your ability to disagree, have your own opinion, your own thoughts, but you have to execute it just as if you agreed with it. If you can't, then you're in the wrong place, and you should be someplace where you can do that. If it's a values issue, that's a whole different issue. Shouldn't be any compromise on values. But in terms of business decisions, people will make different decisions. Your job is really to execute after, hopefully, a vigorous discussion, all opinions heard, and somebody decides. Often it's not the CEO, it's the CIO, it's the chief medical director, it's head of sales or whoever. Did I answer your question?
Kind of. I think I'm trying to frame it more when you enter a company, when you're not the CEO and you're very other, and you kind of carry the burden of your identity with you, so you want to make sure you do everything right. Kind of like the thinking twice before you act.
Yeah, look, the reality is you can't change who you are. I always say, I make it their problem. I just don't worry about it. I worry about expressing what I think is the best course of action for the organization. And, I don't want to be wildly wrong, but I also don't worry about being precisely correct. Because one of the things I learned early on was I wouldn't speak unless I knew that I was 100% correct. People interpreted that as lack of engagement and lack of interest, because they grew up in a world where if you're 20% correct, you share. And so the standard you're judged against is just different. Now, I'm not suggesting you go to 20, but I think you got to make it their problem, because you can't unmake it their. You can't not be who you are.
That sounds like a pretty good place to end it. Can I just say thank you all for joining, and congratulations for getting to hear one of my favorite people in the MIT Sloan world, Ron Williams. Ron, thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.